That bouquet cost me $200, but the expression on my wife's face when I walked into her office on that Valentine's Day turned out to be truly priceless, although not at all in the sense I had expected. My name is Nick Harland, and before this, I thought I knew my wife well. The elevator doors on the 15th floor of the sparkling headquarters of Meridian Tech opened, and I immediately sensed something was wrong. You know that feeling when you enter a room and everyone present suddenly falls silent? That is exactly what happened, and no one even bothered to feign embarrassment. I spent the entire morning preparing the surprise. In my jacket pocket were 2 tickets to Paris. A table at a restaurant for the evening had been booked, and those ridiculous red roses that Eliza always supposedly adored. After 18 years of marriage, I thought I had completely figured out her character. I was catastrophically wrong. Brianna Chen, one of Eliza's colleagues, literally squeaked my name. Her face took on the hue of sour milk. She asked what I was doing here. I replied that I had come to congratulate my wife and showed her the bouquet. The silence stretched like a rubber band, pulled to its limit. 20 people looked at me with pity or poorly concealed gloating. Paul Martinez, the office gossip, who always fawned over Eliza, even took a step back. Brianna said my name again, softly. At that moment, a thunderous voice boomed across the office space. Victor Cranes. The CEO walked confidently toward me, arms wide open, as if we were old friends. In reality, we had seen each other maybe 3 times at corporate events, and he had always struck me as the type who rehearses his handshake in front of a mirror. I nodded, confused by his sudden friendliness, and asked if Eliza was in. Victor grinned, and something in his tone made my stomach clench. It was the smile of a shark before a strike. That was when I saw her. Eliza came out of the conference room and looked magnificent. Perfect hair, flawless makeup, and that blue dress I had bought her for Christmas. But that wasn't what stopped me. On her left hand sparkled a massive diamond ring. It was definitely not that modest piece of jewelry I had given her 18 years ago. Someone from the staff shouted congratulations. Another voice asked about the wedding date. Eliza met my gaze, and in 2 seconds her face cycled through several expressions: shock, guilt, defiance, and finally, a semblance of relief. Victor walked over to her and kissed her in front of everyone. That kiss lasted too long for a work environment. When they pulled apart, he possessively wrapped his arm around her waist. Victor announced to the entire office that Eliza had made him the happiest man by agreeing to become his wife. Applause began. Someone opened champagne. Brianna even cried tears of joy while I stood there with the $200 roses, feeling like I had been hit by a freight train. Eliza said my name, barely audibly, but I heard it clearly. She pulled away from Victor and walked toward me, her heels clicking on the polished floor. I congratulated her, surprised at my own calmness. She tried to explain something, but I looked again at the ring. It was huge and surely cost more than my truck. Victor came up to her, still grinning. He said Eliza had told him a lot about me. I shifted the bouquet to my left hand and extended my right for a handshake. He squeezed it too tightly and held on longer than necessary. I noticed that she had never mentioned him. Eliza paled and asked me not to make a scene here. I looked around. Everyone was already aware of our drama. Apparently, I was the last to know the news. She tried to make excuses, but her words sounded unconvincing. The situation looked clear-cut. My wife was engaged to another man while still married to me. Paul Martinez was filming everything on his phone, probably for social media. The champagne had stopped flowing. Victor made a protective gesture, shielding Eliza, which made me clench my jaw. He called the situation awkward. I laughed sharply. Awkward is when you walk into the wrong bathroom. This was something else. Eliza suggested we talk privately. I looked at her for a long time. At the woman I had lived with for so many years. The mother of my son. The person I trusted with everything. I said she had already told me everything, and I placed the roses on the nearest table. The red flowers on the white surface looked like bloodstains on fresh snow. She called out to me, but I was already walking toward the elevator. As the doors closed, I saw the entire office watching me. Tears streamed down Eliza's cheeks. Victor looked embarrassed, and the others seemed relieved that the show was over. I wished them a happy holiday. In the elevator, I saw 18 missed calls from Jaime, my 16-year-old son. He had been texting me all morning, asking if I was sure about my surprise. Smart kid, clearly sharper than his father. I called him back from the lobby. His voice trembled with worry. I replied that I was fine and had just left his mother's office. When he asked how it went, I stepped out into the cold February street. The weather was terrible, slush squelching underfoot. A perfect backdrop for the worst day of my life. I told my son that his mother was getting married. He didn't understand, since she was already married to me. I confirmed that I had thought so too. Getting into my car, I saw a flurry of notifications. News traveled fast. But first, I opened the banking app. I canceled everything. The trip to Paris, the restaurant reservation, the joint credit cards, and the automatic transfers to our shared accounts. By the time I got home, I had severed all financial ties to Eliza Harland, except for the house, and I planned to deal with that soon as well. My phone was blowing up. Eliza called 3 times. On the 4th, I answered. She begged me to let her explain. I listed the facts. Infidelity with the boss. Engagement while still married to her husband. Public humiliation in front of colleagues. She kept saying it wasn't that simple. I sat in my truck in front of the house we had bought 12 years ago. Here we had raised our son and planned our future. She said she loved him. Those 4 words hurt the most. Not an apology, not an admission of wrongdoing, but that. I asked how long this had been going on. It turned out 6 months. While I worked 60 hours a week, growing my construction business and planning surprises, she had been living a double life. I told her the divorce papers would be ready on Monday and hung up. Jaime's car was in the driveway. He must have left his last class without waiting for my answer. Good kid. He didn't deserve this kind of family collapse. I found him in the kitchen doing homework. The tension in his shoulders showed how hard this was for him. We sat down to talk. I confirmed that divorce was inevitable. He asked if I was okay. My marriage was destroyed, my family shattered, but looking at the only person I truly mattered to, I felt not weakness, but rage. I said we would both get through this. For the last 3 hours, my phone hadn't stopped ringing, dozens of calls and messages. I silenced it, but the screen kept flashing. Jaime watched me, expecting a breakdown, but I kept busy. I methodically dismantled 18 years of joint finances with a surgeon's precision. It turned out Eliza had been buying gifts for her lover with our joint card. Expensive things, jewelry, restaurants, trips, and all that time, she kept telling me we needed to save the family budget. Jaime was outraged. I'd already moved the accounts to another bank, changed passwords, and removed her from the insurance beneficiary list. It's amazing how quickly you can destroy a shared life with a few clicks. The bank called about suspicious activity. I explained to the employee that it wasn't fraud, but a divorce. Jaime admitted he had seen them together 2 months ago at the mall. They were holding hands. He hadn't dared to say anything, hoping he was mistaken. I reassured him. That wasn't his responsibility, but mine and his mother's. Eliza called again. She demanded half of everything. The house, the business, the savings. This was her true nature. A calculating woman, planning to profit from her own betrayal. I reminded her that in our state, adultery is a legal ground for an at-fault divorce, and she could end up with nothing. I had proof of her spending joint money on another man. I threatened to hire a private investigator to check all her late nights at work and trips over the past few years. She called me paranoid, but I no longer believed a single word she said. I called my lawyer, Mike Rodriguez. He confirmed that the public humiliation and dissipation of marital assets would help us in court. I demanded that she move out of the house immediately. Mike promised to handle the paperwork. Jaime asked if I was really going to kick her out. I replied that it was my house. I paid the mortgage, and I wasn't leaving because of her actions. My son wanted to stay with me, even if it meant changing schools. He flatly refused to live with Victor. Just then, a message came from Victor himself, suggesting we talk. He claimed I didn't understand something, that Eliza had been unhappy for years. Jaime called that nonsense, since I had always taken care of her while she was busy with work or friends. Victor tried to play the gentleman and set up a meeting at the Riverside Grill restaurant. Despite my better judgment, I agreed. Jaime wanted to come with me to witness the conversation, but I refused. The Riverside Grill tried to look luxurious, but came off cheap. The perfect place to meet the man I despised. Victor was already waiting at a corner table with a glass of expensive scotch. He wore a cashmere sweater, worth a fortune. I came straight from the job site in work clothes and muddy boots, knowing it would annoy him. He stood extending his hand, but I ignored the gesture. I made it clear immediately. We were not friends. He was the man who slept with my wife. I was the wronged husband. No pleasantries. Victor tried to keep face, saying he appreciated my directness. A waitress came over, and I ordered the simplest drink. Victor ordered the same, even though his glass was still full. When she left, the tension at the table became almost tangible. Victor leaned back in his chair and began studying me like a complex problem he was trying to solve. "You're not what I expected," he finally said. I asked what exactly he had expected. It turned out, someone older and more worn down by life. Eliza had described me as someone who had given up on everything long ago. But Eliza says a lot of things, and most of her words are pure fiction. She had complained to him that I was always working and never paid her any attention. I worked to provide for my family, because that's what husbands are supposed to do. Or was I just using work as a way to avoid troubles at home? The waitress brought my scotch. I took a sip and let Victor's question hang in the air for a moment. "You want to know what the real problem was?" I asked. My wife was cheating on me with her boss. That was the whole truth. Everything else was just accompanying symptoms. He tried to justify her, saying the affair started because of loneliness. But I knew the real reason. She was simply selfish and deceitful. Victor's jaw tightened. He claimed I didn't know her as well as he did. I reminded him that I had been married to her for 18 years. How long had he known her? Only 8 months. I couldn't help but laugh. Did he seriously think that in such a short time he understood her better than I did after nearly 2 decades? He insisted he understood her needs. And I replied that right now, what she needed most was a divorce lawyer, and she was going to get one. Victor took a long sip, and I could see him trying to contain his anger. That worked in my favor. I wanted him angry, because angry people make more mistakes. He claimed he hadn't called me here to argue about who knew Eliza better. His goal was to make this process as painless as possible for everyone involved. Painless for whom? I asked. For him? For her? I was already in enough pain. So was our son. Mentioning Jaime made my blood pressure spike. I demanded he leave my son alone. Victor thought a teenager would be affected by how we handled this situation. He suggested coming to a peaceful agreement. But there was no more we in this story. There was me, my unfaithful wife, and him, the man she cheated on me with. I was sure Jaime would stay with me. Victor doubted that, and something in his tone made me wary. He called Eliza a wonderful mother who loved her son. A strange way to show love, destroying a family right on Valentine's Day. Victor excused her, saying she hadn't planned it that way. Then how? Was she going to wait until graduation, or until he finished college? When exactly did she plan to admit she was living a double life? Victor's silence was answer enough. She hadn't planned to. She wanted to have her foot in both camps, keep the stability of the marriage, while having fun on the side. Victor finished his drink and ordered another. He kept saying she had been trapped in an unhappy union, and found something real with him. She just didn't know how to leave without hurting people. In the end, she still hurt people, and in the most spectacular way possible. He called it a mistake. I called it a conscious choice she made over many months. It wasn't an accident. It was a pattern of behavior. The waitress brought the second round. Victor drank and admitted he truly wanted to marry her. I had already understood that from his proposal today. But for a real wedding and shared life, they would have to wait for our divorce to be finalized. The timeline depended solely on how cooperative Eliza wanted to be. And then Victor decided to play his trump card. He offered to make my cooperation financially worthwhile. I looked at him carefully, understanding this was an attempt at bribery. He wanted to compensate me for the inconveniences caused by this situation. He seriously thought he could pay me off to get my wife faster. That was our fundamental difference. Victor Crane believed every problem had a price and could be solved with a large check. He saw me as a simple working man who could be easily bought. He was wrong. I told him about my financial situation. My construction business was worth about $2 million. The house was fully paid off and owned by me. I had retirement savings, an investment portfolio, and enough cash to live comfortably for the rest of my life. Victor was stunned. Eliza had lied to him, that we were barely making ends meet. I reminded him again. Most of her words were lies. So what did I want? I wanted a wife who didn't cheat on me. But since that was impossible, I wanted a divorce and Victor's complete absence from my life after tonight. He persisted, believing that every person had a cherished desire. My desires were simple: a faithful spouse, a shared old age, and respect within the family, so that my son could see parents who didn't humiliate each other publicly. But since that couldn't be restored, I simply wanted to erase them both from my biography as quickly as possible. The subject of Jaime came up. Eliza insisted on joint custody, but our son was already 16. He had the right to decide where to live, and he had already made his choice. Victor tried to appeal to maternal feelings, but where were those feelings when she betrayed her family and secretly got engaged to another man? He accused me of turning our son against her, but she had done a fine job of that herself. Victor's face reddened from the alcohol and growing irritation. He called me as selfish as she was, accusing me of using the child as a weapon. I was simply protecting my son from a mother who valued her fleeting happiness more than her child's well-being. Victor snapped, slamming his glass down on the table. He called me a cold fool. I replied that I was simply a realist. Eliza would get exactly what she deserved: a divorce, a lost custody battle, and a reputation as a woman who cheated on her husband with her boss. Victor jumped up, threw down a $20 bill, and declared the conversation over. I merely regretted the wasted hour of my life. As a parting shot, he promised to take care of her and give her everything I never could. I wished him luck. He thought I would end up alone by my own choice, but the choice was made by them when they decided to betray me. Victor left, staggering slightly. I finished my drink, left a tip, and headed to my truck. My phone was flooded with missed calls from Eliza, but I didn't call back. At home, Jaime was waiting for me. He sat at the kitchen table among his textbooks and immediately bombarded me with questions. He wanted to know if I had hit that man. I admitted I had wanted to, but I held back. When I told him about the attempted bribe, Jaime was furious, calling Victor a total scumbag. We waited for Eliza to return. She was about to learn that she no longer lived in this house. Jaime wanted to stay, but I sent him to his room. This was a conversation that concerned only the two of us. Soon the sound of a car pulling up was heard. Eliza walked into the kitchen, looking like she had been through hell. Smudged makeup, disheveled hair, eyes swollen from tears. She wanted to talk, but it was she who would have to listen. She sat down in the same place where our son had just been sitting. What a contrast. A child working for his future, and a wife who had destroyed our family. I told her about my meeting with Victor and his offer of money. Eliza was shocked, unable to believe he would do such a thing. But it only confirmed what kind of man she had planned to tie her fate to. She cried, calling everything that was happening a nightmare. But she had created this nightmare herself. She didn't know how to confess, and probably intended to lie forever. I cut off her attempts to justify herself with the complexity of the situation. Everything was perfectly simple: a conscious choice to cheat, lies, and an engagement behind her husband's back. She kept saying she had been unhappy, but instead of an honest divorce, she chose betrayal. She was afraid of causing pain, but in the end, she did it in the most humiliating way possible. She claimed she just fell in love, as if it happened by itself. I reminded her that she didn't accidentally end up in another man's bed or in a web of lies. I informed her of the measures I had taken. The divorce papers had been filed, the joint accounts frozen, the credit cards canceled, and she needed to find another place to live. Eliza was stunned, trying to assert her rights to the house. But the house had belonged to me before our marriage, and I had paid the mortgage myself. Under the law, in cases of infidelity, the court can award the home to the wronged spouse. She accused me of throwing her out onto the street. I merely suggested she go to Victor's. But suddenly it turned out that living together was too serious a step for her. What irony! Sleeping with him for 6 months was fine, but sharing a household was scary. She wanted to keep both her lover and the security of her marriage to me. Eliza sobbed, but I felt absolutely nothing. 18 years of marriage left not even a drop of sympathy. I told her to pack the essentials, promising to deliver the rest of her things later. She begged for a chance, for family therapy, calling her action a mistake. But this was not a mistake. It was cold-blooded betrayal, lasting for months. The last thing I heard was her declaration of love, which now meant absolutely nothing. The words hung in the air between us, like something tangible. For a while we both remained silent. Finally I said, "No, it's not like that. You claim you love both me and Victor. I understand that sounds meaningless, but it's the truth. If you truly cared about me, you wouldn't have cheated. Perhaps someone is capable of feeling love for two people at once, but you cannot be married to two people at the same time. You made your choice." Eliza replied that she had chosen Victor because she thought I no longer needed her. But that day, I brought her flowers, and in my pocket were tickets to Paris. Wasn't that proof that I wanted to be with her? She complained about my constant busyness, about how we had stopped spending time together and talking. I was working my butt off to provide for our family. We didn't talk because she was never home. Constant late nights at the office, meetings with friends, or other things that had no place for me. She claimed I never took the initiative myself, but when I invited her to dinner last weekend, she cited fatigue. And the week before that, when I suggested going to the movies, she already had plans with Brianna. Now she claimed those invitations weren't sincere, but were just a formality. "How do you know what I was feeling?" I asked. "Did you ever ask? Did you ever try suggesting something yourself? Or did you just decide I wasn't serious and use that as an excuse to spend time with Victor?" Eliza said nothing, and that was more eloquent than any words. I added that she was just looking for reasons to justify her actions. But there are no reasons, only excuses. She apologized, but I knew she was only sorry she got caught. She was embarrassed by the public exposure and the consequences, but she didn't regret her actions. If she truly felt remorse, she would have ended things with Victor and tried to save our marriage, not gotten engaged to him. She excused it as panic, but it was a conscious choice. The conversation turned to our son. Jaime was already 16, and he had the right to decide who to associate with. Eliza was afraid I would turn him against her, but I didn't need to do that. The boy saw her actions for himself and understood what kind of person she was. She was still his mother, and that was something he would have to live with for the rest of his life. Eliza abruptly stood up, knocking over her chair. She called me a fool, to which I replied that perhaps I was, but at least I wasn't a cheater. She threatened that I would regret this. The only thing I truly regretted was the 18 years of life wasted on a person capable of such betrayal. She mentioned Victor's words that I was cold and selfish, and that she deserved better. But Victor didn't know me, and apparently, neither did Eliza. She accused me of enjoying her suffering. But can one take pleasure in the collapse of a family, the destruction of a marriage, and public humiliation in front of an entire office? I was simply letting her reap the fruits of her own decisions. Eliza picked up her purse and headed for the stairs to pack her things. She threatened to sue for the house, the business, and custody of Jaime. I merely told her to try. Before going upstairs, she said that I used to be a good man. I replied that I still was. I just wasn't her man anymore. When she disappeared into the bedroom, I stayed alone in the kitchen. I listened to the sounds of an 18-year marriage crumbling, drawers slamming, hangers rustling in the closet, the dull thud of things falling into a suitcase. A message came from Jaime. He asked if it was over and if I was okay. I replied that it was almost over and asked him to stay in his room until his mother left. 20 minutes later, Eliza came down with 2 suitcases. She had changed into jeans and a sweater, fixed her makeup, and looked like she was heading on a business trip, not leaving her husband. She said she would stay at the Marriott downtown until she found permanent housing. She wanted to say goodbye to her son. Jaime came down and looked at her with a strange expression. She promised to call tomorrow and said she loved him. Our son returned the sentiment, but he didn't go to her or ask when they would see each other again. As she left, Eliza said she hadn't wanted this ending. I merely remarked that, in that case, she shouldn't have started it. I didn't help her with her luggage. At the door itself, she warned me not to look for her when I realized my loss, because she would be with someone who valued her. The door closed with a soft click. She was gone. Jaime came down to the kitchen. When asked how I was feeling, I said I felt tired, but also relieved. My son admitted he felt the same. He had long noticed that things weren't right in the family, that his mother had become different, distracted, as if her mind was always somewhere else. He hadn't told me before because he wasn't completely sure, and had hoped he was wrong. We sat in silence, processing what had happened. I promised my son that we would be okay, and for the first time in a long time, I truly believed it. 3 weeks later, I sat in my lawyer's office, Mike Rodriguez. We were reviewing the divorce papers. The terms were fair, which meant Eliza wouldn't like them. Mike explained that due to proven infidelity, she would lose almost everything. All she would get was her personal car, personal belongings, and her retirement account. No alimony, because she was capable of working and had destroyed the marriage herself. The house and business remained my property, as they were acquired before the marriage or run without her involvement. I signed the papers. Mike said they would be served to Eliza tomorrow morning right at her office. As I left the lawyer's office, Victor Crane called. He tried to accuse me of ruining Eliza, claiming she deserved half the assets. I replied that she would get only what the law allowed. Victor insisted on meeting, claiming he had important information about my ex-wife. I warned him to stay away from my life and my divorce. At home, Jaime told me that his mother had invited him to dinner with her and Victor. I said he could go if he wanted to, but I promised to pick him up the moment he felt uncomfortable. The next morning, Brianna Chen, Eliza's colleague, came to my office. She apologized for the office staff's behavior that day and admitted that everyone had known about Eliza and Victor's affair for a long time. They had kept quiet, thinking it wasn't their business. Brianna handed me an envelope from Victor. Inside were copies of emails, messages, and credit card statements. It turned out that Eliza had been cheating on me, not just with Victor. For 2 years, she had been carrying on romantic correspondence with 3 different men. The messages were unambiguous, and the bills from hotels, restaurants, and jewelry stores confirmed her infidelities. I was stunned by my own gullibility. Victor called again. He admitted that he had learned about Eliza's other lovers after their relationship had already begun. She had lied to both of them, pitting us against each other. Victor proposed a deal. He would testify about her infidelity and lies in exchange for my evidence against her. He had already broken up with her, and now she was threatening him with a lawsuit for breach of promise to marry. Additionally, she planned to sue me for emotional distress and him for coercion under threat of termination. I immediately contacted Mike Rodriguez. The new facts changed everything. Now Eliza might end up with nothing at all. That evening, Jaime returned from dinner, looking dejected. He told me that his mother and Victor had argued constantly, trading barbs. Eliza had tried to convince her son that I was being unfair, trying to leave her with nothing. Jaime replied that she should have thought about that before cheating. His mother burst into tears. Victor started yelling at the boy, and in the end, it all ended in a scandal. My son firmly decided not to see them again. The next morning, Mike Rodriguez reviewed the new evidence. He confirmed that I could now expect full custody of my son and to keep all my assets. Soon, Eliza called. She was yelling, outraged that the papers had been served to her again in front of her colleagues. She called the proposed terms insulting. I calmly replied that I had all the evidence of her years of infidelity, including proof that she had spent marital funds on her lovers. I mentioned that Jaime was prepared to testify about how her behavior had affected him. A long silence followed. Eliza realized that Victor had betrayed her. 3 days later, she signed all the papers. She took her car and her belongings. Everything else remained mine. Our 18-year marriage was officially dissolved. Jaime and I celebrated at home with pizza. We felt free of the lies and drama. My son asked if I regretted anything. I replied that I only regretted not finding out the truth sooner. But the choices were made by his mother, and now she was living with the consequences. Jaime admitted he was proud of me and that I had protected our family. 6 months later, I learned that Eliza had moved to another city and changed jobs. Victor had also left, fleeing the consequences of their scandalous breakup. They were no longer my problem. Peace had settled in our home, a peace that had been missing for years. I started dating a nice woman, and Jaime approved of my choice. Life didn't become perfect, but it became honest. One evening at dinner, my son asked if I missed his mother. I honestly answered that I missed the woman I thought she was, but who never actually existed. It was sad, but at the same time, it brought freedom. Because the truth, no matter how painful, is always better than lies. And that was the most important lesson I could teach my son. Always tell the truth, especially when it's hard. Looking at him, I understood that despite all the pain and betrayal, I had raised a person who values honesty and would never treat loved ones the way his mother had. And that was worth everything we had been through.